And there it is, Romelu Lukaku agrees to a move to AC Milan just like clockwork. Every summer transfer window, this report always comes up, and now it's for us to figure out if it's just a rumor or real. The sources for Emerson Royal's move to Milan a little bit more reliable, and the latest news story suggests that Milan are not just going for Roma's former striker in Lukaku, but also their present striker in Tammy Abraham. These are some of the profiles we're going to be looking at today, along with an update on Joshua Zirkzee in today's episode of Rumor or Real. Kicking things off with Emerson Royal to Milan. Now, if you watch the Paulo Fonseca tactics video, you'll be able to see that the role of the fullbacks to this particular coach is a very important one. Even if you look at his move as a coach from Shakhtar Donetsk to Lille, the only player that he took from his former club in Ukraine to Lille was a fullback in Ismaili. That tells you how much he values that particular role. Even the rumors that have linked Milan to some Lille players that have coached under Fonseca, the only one Milan has really been linked with is Thiaw Santos, who also happens to be a fullback. And this focus on fullbacks that Milan suddenly have in this mercato, specifically right backs in Matty Cash, Thiaw Santos, now Emerson Royal, this tells me, as we've discussed in previous videos, that there are some serious question marks, at least in this coach's mind, about our right back, our captain in Davide Calabria. The fact that Milan is courting so many players for that same position, it tells you that Milan is either looking to replace Davide or they're trying to create some healthy competition. The report suggests that Milan has no plans of actually selling the captain. There's no plans of actually moving him. They want to actually create an environment where he's a little bit more tested. His performances over the recent past, if really the recent last 2 seasons, you could say, have not been the best. And for that reason, Milan is courting the right back profiles. Maybe that competition wouldn't actually replace Calabria, but get better out of Calabria. Now, recently there was a video floating around of Milan meeting Emerson Royal's agent in May. The initial expectation was that Spurs are looking for a price tag somewhere around that 25 million mark. To me, that sounds a little bit on the higher side for what Milan would be willing to pay. And some reports have suggested that Milan was hoping to find a deal somewhere between that 15 to 18 million mark. Now, when you look at Emerson's performances with the Spurs, it is interesting to take note that it would be a little bit strange for Milan to pay, somewhere around that 25 million price tag for this player when this player last season only played about 1,300 minutes. So he hasn't really been a consistently good performer for the Spurs. And if you look at this tweet from Martina, I think he makes a good point here. There's the name of Emerson Royal. That is what is catching a lot of Milan fans' eyes. But if you look at a player like Thiaw Santos, who already played under this coach, he had almost tripled the amount of minutes that he played for Lille. That tells you the difference in availability and the difference in performance that these two players have had for their specific clubs. And would it be reasonable for Milan fans to be caught up in the name of Emerson Royal and ignore a maybe better player, a more consistent performer in Thiaw Santos, who, by the way, would also probably cost Milan significantly less? I think Lille could potentially do a deal for Thiaw Santos around that 10 million mark. Now, latest reports have suggested, including according to Fabrizio Romano, that Milan have agreed personal terms with Emerson, and now they only have to find some type of an agreement with the Spurs. Their asking price remains 25 million. Milan want a deal done under that 20 million mark. But when it comes to this particular report, it seems pretty obvious that Fonseca wants a fullback. I think this move is definitely possible. As a matter of fact, I'm actually gonna stamp this as real. I think the sources or the journalists that have talked about this report, they are pretty credible people, and I think there's a strong possibility of this happening. And the second player to give an update on at this point in time would have to be Youssouf Fofana. So as we've talked about in the past multiple times, Milan is desperate in this mercato to sign a central defensive midfielder. A bunch of profiles at this point in time have been floated around. At the end of the day, because the Euros are going on, I think the movement of the players is actually much slower. The approvals are coming in much slower. The negotiations have really stalled because a lot of these players don't want to talk to their agents about their next move. They just want to focus on the competition. The transfer window itself officially opens on July 1st for Serie A. I believe it's already open in the Premier League from June 14th onwards. So there has been a bit of a slowdown in these movements. Youssouf Fofana recent update is that one of the teams that Milan was competing with for this player was Juventus. And from the looks of it, Juventus have completed a move for Douglas Luiz from Aston Villa. And the fact that they've completed that move, Douglas Luiz was a player that was linked to Milan also last summer transfer window. The fact that they've completed that move, they don't really have as much of a need for a player of the profile and characteristics of Youssouf Fofana. This kind of leaves the pathway for Milan to go for this player a lot more open than maybe it looked like before. The benefit for Milan, as we've talked about in the past videos, is that this player only has 1 year left on his contract. His price tag is probably somewhere in that 20 to 25 million mark, but because he only has 1 year left on his contract and he has informed his club in Monaco that he will be leaving at the end of his contract. So if they want to cash out on this player, it's going to have to be in this little window. The few profiles that Milan has looked at for this particular role, someone like Mats Wiefer, also Andre Trindade. Of all of those players that Milan are considering, Youssouf Fofana would likely have the highest price tag and would likely also have the highest salary, mostly because he probably has the highest amount of experience. Even as we speak right now, he's playing for France in the Euros. So because of his experience and profile, he would cost the most money, but he might bring the best results for you too. He's said to be a player that can comfortably play in a 4-2-3-1. He can also play in a 4-3-3. He would be that defensive profile who would kind of sit back with the center backs, be almost like that third center back body, but also have the creativity to pass the ball around. Some reports are now suggesting that PSG are also interested in this player. You know, seeing his profile, seeing the requirements that Milan needs to fulfill and the reports that are coming out, I think it's possible. I'm going to stamp this as possible for now. And then there's a surprise interest of a Premier League club in a Milan player. It's said that Newcastle have actually reached out to Milan, have connected regarding Malick Thiaw. In the same conversation for this Milan center back, there was apparently no communication about the other Milan center back, Infika Tomori, who actually has been linked to the club. A club like Newcastle United, which obviously has the richest owners in the world of football, even they have to stay within certain financial parameters. This means that Newcastle would have to sell a player in order to be able to buy a player, to try and stay within that PSR guideline so that they don't, risk getting a fine or points deduction. The same report suggested that there was a conversation about Malick Thiaw moving to Newcastle and Kieran Trippier moving to Milan. Now the Trippier move, I don't honestly fully understand because he's a 33-year-old player. We're trying to find somebody who can compete with Davide Calabria. It doesn't seem like that would be the right profile to bring in that fullback role. And even when it comes to Malick Thiaw, I mean, it's a little bit confusing, I'll be honest, because I believe Milan signed him for somewhere around that 8 million price tag. And his first season, he was actually a revelation. Milan fans fell in love with him. He was even getting call-ups to the Germany squad, but his second season was significantly slower. Last season, he was much more prone to making mistakes. He had some injury issues. It just wasn't what his first season was. If Milan can get a price for Malick Thiaw in that 20 to 25 million range, do you think he's a player that Milan should sell and instead invest it into a different quality center back? I do think it is possible. I think something like this can happen, but for now, I'm going to stamp this report as unlikely. I think Milan already has too many roles that they have to fulfill. The club is desperate for center back additions, not more subtractions. However, if they're quoted a price that is significantly over what his present market value is, I do think the club would consider selling. And then there's the big Romelu Lukaku's move to Milan. I mean, as I said, every summer window, I feel like for the last couple seasons, there have been reports about this player is on the verge of joining Milan, has almost agreed to join Milan. And it's no different this time around. His situation with Chelsea is so complicated. Actually, it's not even complicated. It's very simple. Neither of the two sides want each other, but Chelsea cannot actually sell this player because their demands for their price tag is way too high. And it's no different this summer around. Suddenly, a couple days ago, reports started to flow that Milan is agreeing to a deal, or Romelu Lukaku is going to be making a move to Milan. La Gazzetta dello Sport now recently said that Milan have agreed personal terms, and Lukaku has now given his go-ahead for a move to the Rossoneri. Some journalists, some more balanced journalists, have actually talked about how this is probably all news reports that are being floated around into the media, more likely coming from his entourage, his side, more so than the Milan side. They are more desperate to find a solution with Chelsea, so they're actually the ones that are floating these stories into the transfer market to find some type of a solution for this player's future. Now, there are three things to keep in mind. First of all, his price tag at this point in time is estimated to be somewhere around that 35 million euro mark, 40 million euros. The way that Chelsea have him on their books, they need to at least sell him for 34.5 million euros this season to not claim a loss on the player. That doesn't look good on their books with the whole PSR situation happening, which outside of UEFA's financial fair play are Premier League's own profit and sustainability rules. So first of all, that's a massive price tag to pay for a player like Lukaku. If Milan signs him, there's no Joshua Zirkzee or Artem Dovbyk or any other player coming in. Secondly, his salary. His salary is expected to be somewhere around that 7.5 million mark, which again would make him the highest paid player on this team. He would go above Rafael Leao, which I highly doubt the club would be willing to do at this point in time. The third thing is the article that La Gazzetta dello Sport put out, where they talked about how a new Milan is coming about, Milan XL, a team that's going to be physically bigger and physically more imposing on the football field. According to this report, we don't even know if this is true for sure, if Paulo Fonseca wants to create a more physical Milan compared to what he's seen in the past, and who is really more XL than Big Rom himself. So at this point in time, when it it comes to this particular story, something tells me, guys, this is just a rumor. The only reason I say this is because I've seen this story too many times. Now, I do think this could be possible if there is an option just to be able to loan this player. Will Milan spend 40 million this summer transfer window to sign Romelu Lukaku? No, I cannot see that happening. To me, that is a flat out rumor. And a quick little update on Joshua Zirkzee. At this point, guys, these players are playing in the Euros. There's been a lot of frustration from the Milan fans as to why isn't anything happening in the Mercato for Milan. It gotta be a little bit more realistic. These players on international duty, they don't want to be distracted by which club they're going to be playing for next. And let's be real, the Italian transfer window still hasn't opened. It's still about, 10 days away. So when it comes to the Zirkzee move, at this point in time, there's really nothing happening. It looks like things are also kind of moving slow with the whole Manchester United side of things. Reports suggest that, United is also very cautious with how they're dealing with the situation. They're also being careful with how they negotiate with the agent as to what the commission he's going to ask for, because one recent report said that the agent's commission actually at the beginning was, according to this particular report, was only 6 million. He then increased it to 9 million. He then bumped it up to 12 million, and then he eventually wanted 15 million. And this gradual increase of the commission is what actually frustrated Milan and totally stalled the move. So at this point, I think we have to be realistic. The Euros have to be over for the Dutch team. Zirkzee has to come back home. And I think then we'll start to find out what exactly is going to happen here, because I do think the player's willingness to go to a particular club could work in, one of the club's favors, I guess. But for now, Zirkzee to Milan at that 15 million commission amount, I'm going to continue to call that as unlikely. And the final profile for today that we're going to be looking at is Pierre Emile Hojbjorg. Now, he's being considered another profile alongside Youssouf Fofana, Mats Wiefer, I don't know, I'm forgetting names, Andre Trindade. The report suggests that he wants away from the Spurs because for a couple seasons he hasn't been able to play in the Champions League. He wants Champions League football that he can get with Milan. He also has an expiring contract that expires in 2025, so Milan could get a deal on this player. His value is set to be around that 18 million mark. So there's possibility of picking up a discount. The player did make about 39 Premier League appearances last season. In his career in the Premier League, guys, he's made over 250 appearances, and he's still only 28 years old. So in my opinion, when we're looking at the profiles that we're looking at, Mats Wiefer plays for Feyenoord in the Dutch league. Trindade plays in Brazil. You look at someone like Fofana plays in Ligue 1. Hojbjerg, week in and week out, plays in a tough, fast, physical league in the Premier League. And he's also a perennial starter, essentially, for the Denmark side, too, playing right now in the Euros. So when it comes to experience, alongside Fofana, I guess, you could say that this is probably the profile that Milan should consider. It is said that Milan and Fonseca specifically doesn't want just a completely defensive guy. He wants a player that has a little bit more balance when it comes to the defensive side, but also has the ability to be more creative. So keeping his price and experience in mind, Hojbjerg might actually be the player that Milan eventually goes for. His balance characteristics, having that defensive capability, I think a Hojbjerg move to Milan, I would stamp that as possible. Especially keeping the finances in mind, Milan would actually hold on to more money if they were to sign this player. So I do think this can actually happen. And there you have it, guys. Those are some of the profiles I wanted to take a look at today. Don't be impatient. That's the only thing I would say right now. The transfer window hasn't officially opened up. The Euros are still going on. Don't get impatient with the club if they haven't actually gotten signings done, because a lot of the profiles like Fofana, like Zirkzee, like Hojbjerg, you look at all these players, they're still playing in the Euros for their teams. So let's be a little bit more patient, keep an eye on all these profiles, and from my side, as always, Forza Milan, grazie mille, ciao tutti. This is the same coach that once walked into a Champions League press conference wearing the Mask of Zorro costume. But one of the biggest questions on the minds of Milan fans is, what are his tactics? What kind of systems does he play with? What kind of formation does he implement? So let's bring out the tactical board and dive right in.